My name is Eveline Hartmann. And at 72, I have learned that silence can say more than any sentence. I live alone now, in a narrow brick house near Forsyth Park in Savannah, where the air tastes faintly of salt and magnolia. My days are simple French novels in the morning, tea at 4, and sometimes, on lonely evenings, I cook the dishes my husband once loved. Tonight, it was coq au vin, simmered low and slow, the way he used to ask for it after coming home from sea. Andrew, my only son, had called earlier, his voice bright. Mom, you'll love her. Camille's from Lyon. She studied art history. She's different. His excitement softened the ache I'd carried since his father's passing. I wanted to meet the woman who made him sound alive again. The doorbell rang just as I was setting the table. Andrew stepped in first, his tie crooked, his eyes full of warmth. Behind him, Camille Durand glided in tall, porcelain skin, a dress that looked too expensive for comfort. Bonsoir. Madame Hartmann, she said, her accent polished and precise. The kind learned in classrooms, not kitchens. 2 older guests followed her parents, introduced with smiles that felt practiced. Your home is so quaint, Camille said, glancing around as if memorizing every imperfection. It smells authentic. I smiled, the way I do when students try too hard to impress. I hope it tastes authentic too, I replied, pouring the wine. Dinner began with laughter that didn't quite reach anyone's eyes. The supposed father spoke of Montreal, yet his R's rolled like someone from Lille. The mother nodded often, her words perfectly chosen, but oddly detached. Camille translated unnecessarily, as if performing for an invisible audience. Andrew looked proud, eager. Isn't she wonderful? Mom. She even helped me with a few French phrases. I met Camille's gaze across the table. Her smile was flawless, almost rehearsed. She touched Andrew's hand lightly, then turned to her mother and whispered something too quick for him to catch. I caught every syllable. Still, I said nothing. I only refilled the glasses, letting the moment fold into the hum of cutlery and candlelight. Some performances, I thought, don't begin on stage. They begin at the table. And I already knew this one by heart. Halfway through dinner, the rhythm of conversation began to thin. The coq au vin had settled into silence, save for the clinking of forks against porcelain. Camille's perfume lingered faintly in the air, something floral, sharp at the edges. Her laughter chimed like glass whenever Andrew spoke, but her attention kept slipping toward her parents, as if something unspoken pulsed beneath the politeness. She leaned closer to them then, her voice dropping into a smooth, fluent French that carried across the table. Regardez-la, she murmured, her tone honeyed and cruel. Cette vieille femme, quel visage de truie. Son fils est mon billet de visa. Her father chuckled softly, adjusting his cufflinks. The mother dabbed her lips with her napkin and whispered back, Restez gentille, ma chérie. C'est presque fini. The room tilted, just slightly. I could feel the blood drum once behind my ears, but my hands remained steady. I lifted my glass, looked at the deep red surface of the wine, and set it down without sound. Andrew kept talking something about his new project, a new client, but his words blurred behind the low hum of their private laughter. I waited until Camille reached for her fork again before speaking, each syllable deliberate, my accent as clear as Paris in springtime. Voulez-vous un peu plus de vin? Mademoiselle, j'enseignais cette langue avant même votre naissance. The room froze. Camille's hand trembled. Her fork clattered softly onto the plate. Her parents' smiles withered into blank porcelain masks. Andrew glanced between us. confused. Mom, what did you just say? Only that she might like some more wine. I answered, my voice gentle, almost kind. Then I met Camille's eyes. Behind their careful blue polish, panic flickered small, bright, undeniable. For the rest of the meal, no one spoke more than they had to. The candles burned lower, the air thick with something colder than embarrassment. And when I finally rose to clear the dishes, I did so slowly, making sure my footsteps were the only sound left in the room. After they left, the house felt too quiet, as if the air itself refused to settle. The scent of red wine and rosemary lingered over the table, clinging to the curtains and my sleeves. I stacked the plates one by one, the porcelain cool against my palms. Outside, the fountain at the corner murmured its endless rhythm, steady and indifferent. When Andrew hugged me goodnight, he hadn't noticed Camille's silence. He only said, "Dinner was wonderful. Mom, you made her feel so welcome." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him like a punctuation mark to something I didn't want to reread. I turned to the sink. Warm water ran over my fingers and the first plate slipped, landing back with a muted thud. I steadied it and exhaled slowly. Every teacher learns to recognize masks, those who flatter to gain favor, who smile while calculating angles. Camille had that same brightness, practiced and hollow. I'd seen it too many times across lecture halls, from students who called me Madame with reverence and rolled their eyes the moment they thought I wasn't looking. Above the sink, a framed photograph of my husband hung slightly askew. In it, he stood on the deck of his ship, wind in his hair, eyes squinting against the sun. He used to say, "The sea revealed a person's truth. Calm waters never did." I wondered what he would have said about tonight. The kettle clicked softly on the stove. As I waited for it to boil, a phrase from my old syllabus drifted back. Les mots ont des lames cachées. Words have hidden blades. Camille's had found their mark, but not deep enough to draw blood. Not yet. I poured the tea, watching the color bloom in the cup. Slow and deliberate. There was no anger left. Only a sharp clarity, the kind that comes when the heart stops arguing with the mind. Some people believe in confrontation, in calling deceit by its name the moment it appears. I believe in observation first. The truth, like tea, steeped better when left alone for a while. So I cleaned. I folded. I listened to the clock tick against the wall, and by the time the last dish dried, I already knew silence would serve me better than fury. The next evening, I found Andrew's car already parked under the magnolia tree. Through the window, I could see him on the porch, holding a white box from the bakery. He knew I liked, the one with the flaky lemon pastries I used to buy for his father. He smiled when I opened the door. That same boyish grin that once got him out of trouble in every classroom. Every scraped knee apology. "Peace offering," he said, lifting the box. Camille felt awful. She thinks maybe something she said came out wrong. I let him in. The house still smelled faintly of last night's wine and polish. He sat at the kitchen table, loosening his tie, waiting for me to ease the tension. I poured coffee instead. "Mom," he began, his voice measured. "I know you think something happened, but maybe you misheard her. You've been tired lately. Accents can sound sharper than they are." I stirred my cup, watching the swirl of milk fade to brown. "You think I misheard my own language?" He hesitated, looking down. "No, maybe you misunderstood the tone." She was nervous. Meeting you meant a lot to her. Nervous. The word fell like dust. I studied him, the careful posture, the earnest defense. My son, who once questioned everything, now choosing blindness because it was easier than watching something he wanted collapse. He went on, softly. "She's under pressure. Immigration, job interviews. Moving here, it's a lot. Pressure doesn't turn kindness into cruelty, I said quietly. He looked at me as if I'd broken something fragile between us. Mom, please, don't make this bigger than it is. I didn't answer. The old clock ticked once, twice, filling the silence that neither of us could bridge. I reached across and touched his hand, the same way I used to when he was small and feverish, his skin too warm for comfort. He's protecting a dream. I thought, not her. When he left, he kissed my cheek and promised to call tomorrow. The box of pastries sat unopened on the counter. I stared at it for a long time before placing it neatly in the refrigerator. Tomorrow, I decided. I'd start looking for the truth on my own. The next morning began like any other sunlight through lace curtains. Kettle sighing on the stove, but my mind no longer trusted calm routines. After Andrew's visit, I'd lain awake most of the night, replaying every word, every look from that dinner. Denial is a kind of blindness, and my son was walking through it with both eyes closed. I needed clarity, not confrontation. So I opened the old roll-top desk in the study and pulled out an address book I hadn't used in years. Near the back, in my looping handwriting, was a name, René Lacroix, one of my brightest students, sharp, disciplined. The kind who never confused kindness with naivety. She'd joined the Department of Homeland Security, working in the Fraud Detection and National Security Division of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. I'd sent her a graduation letter once. She'd replied with gratitude and a promise to do the right kind of work. I typed her name into my email. Fingers steady. Renee, I hope you're well. I need a professional eye on something delicate. A young woman named Camille Durand, French national, engaged to my son. Certain details don't align. I believe discretion is essential. I hesitated only a moment before pressing send. By afternoon, she replied. The message was brief but precise. Her tone the same efficient calm I remembered from her essays. She asked for Camille's date of birth, passport number, and visa classification, promising to run a quiet check through internal databases. That evening, as I washed the coffee cups, my phone chimed again. Renee's email appeared and time-stamped 9:47 p.m. Eveline, I checked our system. There's no record of a Camille Durand entering under that identity. Visa file incomplete. The photo on her application doesn't match the one on her passport. I'd advise caution. I reread the words until they blurred. No record. Incomplete. Mismatched. They didn't shock me. They simply confirmed the instinct that had been simmering since that night at the table. I printed the email and slid it into a manila folder, labeling it in neat ink, Camille Personal. Then I placed it in the drawer beside my late husband's watch, its face frozen at the hour he died at sea. Truth, like the tide, was beginning to turn. 2 days passed before Renee called instead of writing. Her voice was low, careful. Every word weighed before release. Eveline, I verified the background. She said, your instincts were right. Camille Durand isn't who she claims to be. Her legal name is Lucie Armand, born in Lyon, France. She's still married. No record of divorce. Her husband resides in Marseille. I sat down. The receiver pressed lightly against my ear. For a moment, I could hear only the faint hum of static between us. Renee continued. The two people introduced as her parents. They're listed as freelance performers with a cultural agency in Montreal. They do ceremonial roles, weddings, embassy receptions. I found the same pair in a promotional brochure. Her efficiency left no room for disbelief. I thanked her quietly and ended the call. The house, once a place of refuge, now felt like a stage that had hosted a scene of deceit. I carried my laptop to the kitchen table and began to search. It didn't take long. The agency's website was open to the public names, rates, portfolios. There they were, smiling under the heading, Authentic Family Packages for Cultural Events. Same faces. Same eyes that had looked across my table and called me Madame Hartmann. Scrolling further, I found a payment record. The booking matched the weekend of our dinner. I printed it. The paper still warm when it slid from the tray. Anger never came. Not in the way one might expect. Instead, I felt an old, familiar sadness, the kind that once visited when my students forged essays. Thinking I wouldn't notice, deception never surprised me. It only reminded me how far people would bend for gain. Andrew's laughter from that night echoed faintly in my head. He had believed her so completely, loved her so sincerely. I pitied him. Not for his innocence, but for mistaking charm for truth. I gathered the papers into a new folder marked Lucy Armand, then placed it beside the first. The evidence was clear, but revelation was not my aim. Timing mattered more than outrage. Truth, I had learned long ago, was most powerful when it arrived on its own feet. So I waited, calm and deliberate, as the mask began to slip on its own. Andrew's call came on a Thursday evening, just as I was watering the small rosemary bush by the window. His voice was hesitant, the brightness forced. "Mom, Camille wants to make amends," he said. "She feels terrible about how dinner went. Could we try again? Maybe this time. We can start fresh." I let the silence breathe before answering. "Of course," I said finally. "Friday evening, same time. I'll cook again." After he hung up, I stood by the sink, hands resting on the cool porcelain. The decision wasn't impulsive. Truth had already chosen its path. I was simply setting the table for it. That night, I sent a final email to Renee, attaching every file I had gathered: passport discrepancies, agency invoices, the Montreal brochure. Within an hour, her reply came, forwarded to HSI Savannah Field Office. Quiet verification underway. Expect contact soon. The next day unfolded like déjà vu. I ironed the same linen tablecloth, arranged the same bouquet of hydrangeas, laid out the same dishes. Even the coq au vin simmered at the same slow pace, its aroma curling through the air like memory itself. At 7 sharp, the doorbell rang. Camille arrived in a soft blue dress, her smile perfectly measured. The parents followed, hands clasped, expressions rehearsed. Andrew seemed relieved, hopeful, unaware of the quiet machinery already in motion beyond our doorstep. "Thank you for giving us another chance," Camille said, placing a small box of chocolates on the counter. "You're very kind." "Kindness," I said, "is easier the second time." Dinner began with polite chatter. I kept my tone light, my gestures familiar. I asked about their return flight, about Lyon's weather, about trivialities that floated harmlessly above the surface. All the while, I studied the lines of Camille's face, the faint tension around her jaw, the way her fingers tapped when silence grew too long. Andrew laughed, and for a moment, I almost pitied her again. Almost. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 8. I poured more wine, smiled, and folded my napkin neatly across my lap. Outside, headlights turned slowly into the driveway. I felt no fear, only calm, like a professor at the end of term, waiting for a student to face the lesson they had written for themselves. The knock came just as I set the cherry tart on the table. It was a firm, deliberate sound, neither hurried nor hesitant. Camille froze mid-sentence, her laugh slicing off into silence. I wiped my hands on the napkin, excused myself, and went to the door. 2 figures stood under the porch light. Agent Marcus Chen, neatly pressed suit, calm eyes. Beside him, Renee, her expression professional, unreadable. "Good evening, Mrs. Hartmann," Chen said quietly. "We spoke earlier. May we come in?" I stepped aside. The room seemed to shrink when they entered. Andrew rose from his chair, confusion flickering across his face. Camille's smile returned too quickly, too wide. Miss Lucy Armand, Chen said, opening a leather folder and placing it gently on the table. We're from Homeland Security Investigations. We have some questions about your current visa status and marital record. The name struck the room like a crack of thunder no one wanted to acknowledge. Camille's fingers tightened around her glass. You must be mistaken, she said, her voice trembling, the French accent thickening. My name is Camille Durand. Renee met her gaze evenly. No, it isn't. We've confirmed your identity through French civil records and travel logs. You're still legally married. We'd like you to come with us to clarify a few things. Andrew looked from one to the other, bewildered. Married. What is this, Camille? Lucy no longer. Camille turned to me then, fury flooding her face. You did this. You called them. You want to ruin me. I kept my voice steady. You ruined yourself, I said softly. I only listened. She pushed her chair back sharply, the legs scraping the floor. The so-called parents remained still, their faces drained of pretense. Chen gestured calmly toward the door. Let's step outside. Ms. Armand. Lucy hesitated, then bolted for the foyer. But Chen was already there, his voice firm, yet polite. Please, ma'am. She stopped, trembling. When the door closed behind them, Andrew sank into his chair, his hands covering his face. The silence that followed was heavier than grief, but cleaner somehow. I poured tea for him, setting the cup gently by his hand. The steam rose between us, thin and fragile, like a bridge that might hold. 3 weeks passed before the house began to sound like home again. Morning light spilled through the kitchen window, catching the dust in soft motion. I had returned to my shifts at the public library 2 afternoons a week, cataloging new arrivals, helping students find books they didn't know they needed. The quiet rows of shelves suited me. Silence there was purposeful, not heavy. Sometimes I would look up from the desk and catch a glimpse of a young couple studying together, hands brushing, heads leaning close. The sight no longer hurt. It only reminded me how love, in its truest form, leaves no debt behind. Andrew began coming by every Sunday, carrying groceries or flowers he never mentioned. He always rang the bell now, as if permission mattered again. We spoke gently, cautiously at first. He helped fix the back fence, mowed the lawn, stayed for coffee. He didn't talk about Lucy, and I didn't ask. Some wounds close best in silence. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived, stamped with the seal of Homeland Security. I brewed a fresh pot of tea before opening it. The letter inside was brief formal words outlining finalities. Lucy Armand, visa revoked. Fraud investigation ongoing. Petition withdrawn voluntarily by U.S. citizen sponsor, Andrew Hartmann. I folded it neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the drawer beside my husband's watch. The watch no longer worked, but I kept it wound, just to hear the faint click when I turned the knob, a sound that reminded me that some things still respond to care, even if they no longer move forward. That evening, Andrew came by as the sky turned amber. We ate simple food soup, bread, and a shared quiet that didn't ache anymore. When he stood to leave, I walked him to the door. The Spanish moss outside swayed in the warm breeze, silver in the fading light. Mom, he said softly, I don't know how to thank you. I touched his arm, smiling. You already have. After he drove away, I sat by the window with my journal. On the last page, I wrote, Fluency isn't grammar, it's truth. Then, closing the book, I whispered to the stillness, next time you bring someone home, son, make sure she isn't auditioning.